Hello, I'm James Crossley and welcome to one of a series of 10 special podcasts celebrating 10 years of the Centre for the Critical Study of Apocalyptic and Millenarian Movements here at the University of Cambridge, but founded way back in 2015 with the support of the Panacea Charitable Trust. What we'll do in these podcasts is look at things apocalyptic and millenarian from different angles. We hope you enjoy them. Today we're going to look at the Book of Revelation, the text underpinning all things apocalyptic and millenarian in Christian-influenced settings and countries at least, with a profound impact on religious movements, art, film, graphic novels, music, you name it. The Book of Revelation was written towards the end of the 1st century and is usually dated to the 90s. Right from the start of the Book of Revelation, we get to the heart of the very problem of the definition of the word apocalypse, because Revelation is an English rendering of the Greek word apocalypsis, meaning revelation, disclosure, or appearance. And this is from the opening of the Book of Revelation.
The revelation or apocalypsis of Jesus Christ, which God gave him to show his servants what must soon take place. He made it known by sending his angel to his servant John, who testified to the word of God and to the testimony of Jesus Christ, even to all that he saw. Blessed is the one who reads aloud the words of the prophecy, and blessed are those who hear and who keep what is written in it, for the time is near.
This passage is an example of how apocalypsis refers to the otherworldly revelation John claimed to have received, and apocalypse, understood as a disclosure or vision, is an important use of the category in critical scholarship. Based on the opening of Revelation, apocalypsis has also been understood to refer to the contents of the book itself and all its language concerning the future. And so we can see why the book is alternatively called Revelation or the Apocalypse of or to John. And we can begin to understand why this book has been so influential in understandings of and assumptions about apocalypticism. It's possible that the opening words of Revelation also suggest that apocalypse could be a genre. That's to say that it may be an example of a type or style of writing known elsewhere in its historical and cultural context. The extent to which there was a known distinctive genre called an apocalypse in the ancient world is still not clear. As John Collins notes, there is no known example of the term being used with reference to a genre prior to the circulation of the Book of Revelation. But after that point, apocalypse did become a label for broadly similar types of literature. This approach understands apocalypse as a type of literature in which a divine or transcendent revelation is given to a human recipient, presented in a narrative framework and often cast in symbolic or allegorical language. This kind of writing can look to eschatological salvation or transformation of the world, including the assistance of a messianic or supernatural figure, and judgment on or destruction of the wicked, as well as cosmological revelations. Such themes with different emphases can be seen in parts of other biblical texts, such as the Old Testament or Hebrew Bible book of Daniel, and other early Jewish texts which are not found in some biblical canons, such as 1 Enoch or 4 Ezra. Debates and disagreements over the genre and labels relating to apocalyptic literature continue, including with reference to the Book of Revelation itself. To discuss these issues, we've got Dr Michelle Fletcher, who is Deputy Director of the Visual Commentary on Scripture at King's College London, and has lectured at King's College and the University of Kent. She's an editor of the Bloomsbury Scriptural Traces series and the beloved secretary of the British New Testament Society, which means she effectively runs the show whether she likes it or not. Michelle's research has focused broadly on apocalypticism, including the Book of Revelation and the Bible in art, film and popular culture. Among her publications is a book, Reading Revelation as Pastiche, Imitating the Past, with Bloomsbury T&T Clark from 2017, and we'll talk about some of those issues in a moment. Anyway, welcome Michelle.
Thanks, James. It's really great to be here.
Now, given your expertise, and this is a very unfair question, of course, can you give us something of an overview of the Book of Revelation, particularly for those who don't know the general contents? What's it about? What's its main themes? Those kinds of things.
It's a big ask, isn't it? Because
It is.
Revelation is an extremely heady read. You are introduced to a man on an island called John of Patmos, who has a vision of one like a son of man, who is certainly not of this world. He's got a sword coming out of his mouth and big flaming legs. He brings to mind lots of things that readers might be familiar with from the Hebrew Bible. And John is given this prophetic commission. And then he's taken up into the heavens to see the heavenly throne room, where he sees a lamb that has been slain. A scroll is opened, and then destruction happens on the earth. And Revelation has these cycles of destructions, trumpets and bowl plagues, where we see the heavenly realm breaking into the earthly. You've got hail falling down. You've got angels in heaven fighting against a dragon who falls out of the heavenly sphere down into the earth and goes to make war against a woman clothed like the sun, who is also seen in the sky. She gives birth to a child. There's a massive earthquake that happens. The heavens open to allow you to see the Ark of the Covenant. And then we have the fall of a great city known as Babylon, which is often seen as a cipher for Rome. This city is wept over after it falls by the merchants. But then there is a time of rejoicing that the city has fallen. It's not seen as a good thing to ever have been around by the people of God. And those who are on the side of the Lamb, they rejoice over its downfall. They say Alleluia from the famous Alleluia chorus idea. And then we find another warrior appearing, another guise of the one like a son of man with a sword coming out of his mouth. And he vanquishes all the armies that are against him. And in the end, we see another city appear called the New Jerusalem, which is coming down out of heaven, dressed like a bride adorned for her husband. And at the end, the voice on the throne and the voice of the Lamb and the bride all say, come. And it is this idea that there is a new way of being that in the future may come to pass, and that what is here now may pass away. And so it's this vision of a different way of doing things through some pretty heavy symbolism, to say the least.
Well, that's very helpful. And a number of the things you raised will be very familiar, I think, for people who work on apocalypticism through different means. They will have heard of the image of the dragons. They would have heard about New Jerusalem's woman clothed in the sun, Whore of Babylon. And they're all there in that mix that's the book of Revelation. And it can be a puzzling book, I think, for people who are approaching it for the first time, and perhaps for people who are approaching it not for the first time. And I guess one thing scholarship has done with this is to try to control some of that chaos in the book through the question of genre. And in the opening, I mentioned the dreaded issue of genre and audience expectations. And so what sort of book is it supposed to be? What sort of book is Revelation meant to be? Is it recognizable type of Jewish literature we might call an apocalypse? Is it a new form or a conventional form of biblical prophecy? I know you like to challenge ideas of genre, or at least how the term is used in biblical studies. So can you tell us something about how genre has been used to classify the book of Revelation, and what kind of alternatives you might propose?
Thanks, James. Another small question. I think that you're really right. Obviously, I'd hate to say that in public, really, but I've said it now. I think you're right when you're talking about the idea of control. And as humans, we like to control things. And Revelation is this really spiraling, really slippery text, a little bit like a dragon flailing around. It is really difficult to pin down. And the whole of reception history testifies to the fact that people have really, really struggled to understand what on earth it's talking about. And there's always this old adage that Revelation has as many interpretations as interpreters, because it's really difficult. So genre is a way that in academia, in writing, in history, people have always liked to bring to text to try and explain them, to explain what effect they have on us as humans, tragedy with its catharsis, what might be happening when we approach text. And so Revelation, by being so slippery, has more than probably any other book in the New Testament really got people arguing about what kind of genre it is, because it is difficult to pin down. And it looks like a lot of things you've said about other Jewish texts. So it does look a lot like the book of Enoch, 1 Enoch, for example, where there's these heavenly journeys and Enoch sees things that are not of the normal day-to-day earthly experience. We see parts that are familiar with Old Testament texts such as Isaiah. Zechariah. There are resonances with the creation narrative. There are resonances with Exodus, really, really strong Exodus motifs. But we also see something that's a little bit different. This idea of it actually being designated the apocalypsis of Jesus Christ at the beginning. That's the first time we have an extant literature that actually has a text being described as an apocalypsis. And this means an unveiling or a kind of uncovering. So it's setting the audience up from the start to think that they're going to see something they can't currently see is going to be made clear to them. And that sits in the idea of the prophets. And the prophets very much also speak into the time that they are written in. They're not about predicting the future. They're about talking to the status quo and saying, what on earth are you doing? And Revelation in many ways does do this, but it is this sense that these visions are unfolding of something that is to come that hasn't happened yet. It's also held within this really strong narrative form, and that's something that you see in definitions of the apocalypse genre as it starts to be defined by scholars. It's sort of held in a narrative, somebody traveling around and seeing different things. So Revelation has this. When people have gone about plotting Revelation in comparison to other texts that are deemed apocalypses, they have actually seen Revelation does have a different side to it. It's very big on its sort of destruction side and this rebirth side. It's also got lots and lots of different creatures in it, like the dragon, and these idea of these different cycles of destruction marching towards this end. And also the idea of the figure of one like a son of man who resonates with the risen Christ. I mean, it's making it into a Christ follower realm. So it does look like Jewish apocalypses, but it is resonating with the person of the historical Jesus to some extent. So it is a different group who are seeing this message, and they are experiencing these visions of something's to come. It's also got this letter form in it. It's got this idea that it's written to 7 congregations, traditionally translated as churches, assemblies, and they're written into it. Laodicea, Philadelphia, other places in the realm of modern-day Turkey, often referred to as Asia Minor. And as I said before, John is sat on this specific physical place, as many of the prophets of the Hebrew Bible are. So it really is this text which does resonate with what you've seen before, and it does bring lots of texts from the Hebrew Bible to mind, and it does resonate with texts that are often deemed apocalypses, these narrative forms, these heavenly visions, but it sits on its own and is extremely distinctive and difficult to pin down. So the way that I went about looking at it is to think about audience response to it and the fact that as people encounter this text, it's resonating with things they've seen before. When we see things, we often bring to mind things it reminds us of. And Revelation is alive with this. As if you were a reader listening to this, if you had any familiarity with the Greco-Roman world around you, which is difficult not to know about the world around you, or the Hebrew Bible texts of the past, this is going to be sending ideas off in your mind, and you're going to be recalling other textual experiences, other experiences in the political world around you. But you're going to see it slightly different because Revelation always makes a little bit of a change from what's been seen before. And so that's how I really wanted to focus on it. And I think that's the way that it's helpful even for us to think about today as readers, of the fact that Revelation is often seen to be a book that's focused on the future. And I've obviously said it is showing this unveiling of something that is to come. But its textual fabric drives you back into the past, and you're always thinking about what you've seen already. And if we think about the past, and if we're reminded that things aren't the same as the past, it always makes us have a more acute awareness of our presence. It makes us think about loss. It can be nostalgia. It can be gain, although it very rarely is. So it brings a place of reflection, a place of meditation in many ways of how things are different, but in this really heavy, relentless mix in Revelation where you're constantly being thrown around. So it's a really disconcerting reading experience, but you're never going to encounter it without feeling a little bit different by the time you get to the end of it. And every time I read it now, I learn more about Revelation and I bring new knowledge each time, and I realize I see something different in it. And that's the fascination of it as a book, and why everybody's always attracted to it, because it will always change a little bit as you change.
Oh, that's a very nice way of putting it. And one of the ways you deal with some of these questions of non-fixed genre, shall we say, is through notions of pastiche, but also you use film studies as a point of comparison. or as a way of insight into understanding and interpreting the text. So I was wondering if you could say something about how film studies can help you understand the book of Revelation and read the book of Revelation itself, and then maybe expand some of that to the reception history of the book of Revelation. I mean, because if anything has had a reception history in film and art and popular culture or whatever, it's the book of Revelation, certainly for people who study apocalypticism, because it's the one, really, more than any. So that is not only a big question, it's two big questions in one.
Boom! Everybody loves big questions. So the pastiche theory is ever so niche, so let me make it not niche, because who wants to listen to a podcast on super niche? The idea is that there are films which are particularly embroiled with the past. So I looked at films like Body Heat, which is a neo-noir film, Sergio Leone's Once Upon a Time in the West. And I looked at these films which are consciously aware of past cinema and are bringing it to the audience's eye. So when you watch these films, you are reminded of screenshots, of characters, of dress, of things that you've seen before in other ways, but they're realigning it in different ways for a new audience. And so I use this film studies theory to be able to reread Revelation, to help my readers see Revelation differently, because it helped to have a very visceral way of getting on board with Revelation, because a lot of the treatment of Revelation is very, very bookish. It's let's take this word, let's take this sentence, let's separate it out, let's match it to another Hebrew Bible sentence. How might it look similar to that? And I wanted to get back into the sense that the original hearers of Revelation were just that you would have sat and heard this text and your mind would have been alive with the images that are being brought to your mind, rather than thinking, I'm going to parse this word and see if it's a slightly different verbal form from this other text. And so film allows you to think about that sort of visual inundation, particularly if you watch it in the cinema where you can't press stop. And I wanted that to be the sense with Revelation, where it's a book being read over your head and poured out and poured out. And so I use these films which bring all these different elements from the past together in these new locations to allow readers to think differently about it, as I said. And I think that's where film studies can be really strong with biblical studies, is it helps us to get away from that bookish tendency, that high literacy level, and get back into the fact that these texts are emotive and evocative and create images in our minds, have always created images in our minds. It doesn't just have to be the book of Revelation. I mean, the Gospels are full of imagining Jesus walking next to a lake. It's not about the word lake. It's thinking of an image of a man walking alongside a lake. So film studies is really under-tapped in biblical studies as an area that can be brought in to inform us. People have liked doing narrative readings and using sort of English and narrative ideas, but film is another way to go with it. And so that's how I wanted to bring my readers on board with Revelation. And that takes us into film, because the whole point of Revelation being so popular in film is because it is so visual. And in visual art, I work with Revelation and visual art. There's no other way to make sense of Revelation but to start to think, what might this look like? I actually once dreamt the book of Revelation, just the weirdest event of my life. But at the same time, it gave me a completely new perspective on the book of, like, I had the beast coming up out of the lake and like moving around with shaking the water off. And I was like, oh, I've never thought about the water sort of falling off it as it came up out of the lake. Film allows people to see things in new ways, but it also enters into their visual consciousness. So if you've seen something from the book of Revelation, or something on the millennium, which is in chapter 20 of the book of Revelation, you will already bring to mind those past cultural experiences, because it's really difficult not to. Any images you've seen of sort of a lamb with a victory flag in a church. Lots of people don't think about the lamb maybe with his head half hanging off in some sort of horror movie way, standing as slain. So it's really interesting with film, where it has this sense of movement and it has this, as I've said before, visceral idea that draws you in, where you can start to experience it. And Revelation does pop up in weird places. So there's great films like Arnold Schwarzenegger's End of Days, looking Countdown to the Millennium. We see sort of Revelation ideas in that. Did you know that 666 is actually written the wrong way up? It's 999, so it was showing that obviously it was 1999.
Ah, I see.
Yeah,
But
just
then,
to correct
right.
you on that.
And who does it refer to?
Well, it's
Usually
about
it's
it's about the year that the devil
so
was
the
coming.
year is the mark of the beast.
Yeah, 1999, because they
So who's the
wrote it in
beast?
number. They used Arabic numbers, right, in the Book of Revelation.
So who's the
didn't
beast?
they? Satan, but there's somebody called Christine there to say.
Okay.
So there's all this brilliantness in film, but I love it because it keeps it alive. I'm really not going to complain that my biblical book gets to be on film. I'm a really big fan of disaster movies, and it pops up a lot. So I was watching Gerard Butler's Greenland, a comet film, and it has the idea of a large comet coming to destroy Earth, and there's a woman reciting just randomly the Book of Revelation over a car radio that's kind of been abandoned. She's just sort of calling out about the different signs in Revelation. And there is this sense of it being this kind of a language that can fill in the gap when there's nothing else to say. Revelation might be able to speak to these levels of destruction. So it appears in filmic dialogue there. It also has quite a lot of place in horror because where else would you get the devil and beasts and all of these things? So it's
where you can get away with using the Bible, isn't it? It's the darker side of comics and film and novels and so on.
And where people want to consume these really weird images. Really odd looking creatures with like 7 heads and 10 horns and things like that. So as long as it keeps on going and is used in popular culture and is used in filmic culture, I'm going to be a happy person because it also makes me think in fresh ways. And as I've said, it means that it's being repurposed for new communities, which is always interesting, how people continue to want to consume these things and the ideas that are caught up in it. So I think it's a great place for it to be.
There's a lot more I'm sure we could talk about on the question of reception there. And I think the answer is almost obvious. Why choose a text like Revelation rather than an extended TV program on speaking in tongues or something like this, or praying together? I don't know. Because it has a kind of chic in a way that the others perhaps don't.
And the word revelations as well, you've got to cross-reference that. That pops up so much. But in and of itself, the word has power. And it is a kind of cultural, it's a little shorthand for something that's a bit weird. If you say, it's a bit like the Book of Revelations.
Yeah.
Sends you off into that world.
I want to finally push you on reception again, because I don't know if I can split you in two here, but if that's even fair, but the one part of you does a lot of work on art. It's your everyday job for a start. And for the visual commentary on scripture, you've written on, among other things, the war in heaven in Revelation chapter 12, verses 7 through to 12, and the Whore of Babylon in Revelation 17. Can you tell us something about these texts and their representation and what you wrote about them? Why any significance they may have? Why are they been represented? What's going on there?
So Revelation 12 has got the Archangel Michael in it, and obviously he is pretty key. He is the patron saint of quite a lot of places. He appears quite poignantly now as in Kiev, for example. There's a huge St. Michael there. And Michael is famous for vanquishing the dragon in the book of Revelation chapter 12. So there's war in heaven, it breaks out, they fight against the dragon, fights back. There's no place found for him and his cohort, and so they are thrown down out of heaven. And this gets combined over time in a narrative with the idea of angels being thrown out of heaven at the start of creation, rebelling against God. So like the fall of Satan, who's then seen to end up in the Garden of Eden and tempt Adam and Eve. So there's all these different ideas that get brought together with Revelation 12 in reception history. So it becomes this far more complex narrative. And then this becomes part of received art history, and people are able to be familiar with these ideas. So I wanted to look at 3 different representations of this idea of the vanquishing of Satan from a very close time period. So I chose a period of 100 years, and I looked at a wood carving of St. Michael that would have been used in a private chapel, just over 1 meter tall. Originally, it would have been covered in paint in a technique known as polychrome. and he would have been bejeweled, so a really resplendent figure to look at. Nowadays, this pear wood sculpture is just wood, flattering a Protestant aesthetic, I think, in many different ways. It's from the Chicago Institute. But I was interested in this because the dragon is described as having 7 heads in the Book of Revelation. And often you just sort of imagine this kind of Cerberus with just 7 equally spaced heads. But this dragon has heads hidden on his body and in different places. So he's got like one in his chest, and then he's got a little one coming out of a foot. And it's a 3D sculpture. And obviously the idea of sculpture is that you consume it from more than one viewpoint. And so as you move around the sculpture, you can see all these different heads, but also Satan looks different from different angles. So in one angle, he looks kind of impish, like he's pawing at Michael's leg. From another one, he almost looks like he's begging and saying, oh no, please don't hurt me, or that he's even playful. And so this brought me to the idea of the plasticity of evil. And I'd never really thought about this before in relation to Revelation, because it does have this movement. It's very difficult in Revelation to pinpoint what you'd say is good and bad. If you say, oh, good colors are this, good bad colors are this, horns are good, things slip a lot more than that. Lots of things have horns, lots of things are purple, lots of things are red. It's very difficult to tell who's on what side from any kind of coding. We've got the lamb that speaks like a dragon. And so I felt that this sculpture brought together that idea of evil not being this sort of Satan figure like End of Days, but actually something far more subtle and slippery. So that was my first one. I then looked at a painting that had originally been attributed to Hieronymus Bosch, but it's actually by Peter Bruegel the Elder. And it's a really huge creation scape showing the fall of Satan with all of his different cohorts. And somebody's done some fantastic research kind of showing that you can see sort of Beelzebub in there. And it's got these different figures and they're morphing as they fall out of heaven. And you can see the circle at the top showing the light of heaven, the Empyrean. And then that falls down with the dragon's body and all these different figures are sort of running across it. St. Michael's in the middle with his lance going at this many-headed dragon. But what I found in this picture was something nobody had ever seen before because of my Revelation knowledge, is at the bottom, they've spoken before about these images which are sort of wings with long hair falling into the abyss, because what they've done is this idea that everything's coming out of heaven and falling down into the abyss with a sort of left to right angle on the painting. But these are actually the locusts of Revelation with their little teeth. When you zoom in really, really closely, which you can now do with high resolution images, which actually I couldn't do when I saw it in Belgium, they've got iron teeth and they've got tails that come around with stings on them. And so they're actually a really accurate depiction of the locusts from Revelation with the hair like women. Nobody's seen this before. So that was a really exciting dealing with that. But I also looked at it in relation to hybridity and the sense that these angels start off as humanoid at the top, but by the time they get to the bottom, they've become bestial. And the way that we other anything seen as bestial and see hybridity as being negative, and the inheritance of that and all of the different negative dialogues that have been caught up in that. And then the final one that I looked at was York Minster's stained glass window, because there's a huge east window showing Revelation if you ever go to visit York Minster, and it's the largest amount of medieval glass in one place. And it's got Genesis through to Revelation. It's the size of a football field. It's huge. So it starts with Genesis at the top, going down into Revelation. Creation and ending. And so I looked at the pane of glass, pane 7, which shows the stabbing of the devil. And this one has got the devil as a sort of brown thing lying on the floor. He's almost a bit poo-like, actually. And it's got 3 angels perilously on a ledge above him, stabbing at him. And Michael is there with his lance, and then there's 2 other angels, probably Gabriel and Raphael. One of them's got a sword. And the dragon's got Michael's lance in his mouth with this impish grin. And there's this sense that, first of all, at this period it was made, Revelation is not being seen quite as seriously as it was when sort of illuminated manuscripts were being made. It's become a little bit more comedic. So people are slightly different in their consumption of it, because this is based on illuminated manuscripts, this window. But also the idea that the angels are desperately trying not to touch the dragon. Their bodies are curving away from him. So there's this idea of contamination, purity, trying to keep your distance. Revelation's really, really big on that as well. So that was the way that I wanted to explore another line of revelation, which is the sense of driving something away because it can't be touched. But also that in this scene, actually, you don't know what the outcome is. And because we all know there's a new heaven and a new earth in Revelation, because we've heard that said, you read it now with sort of expectation towards the end. But when you would have first heard it, you don't know where it's going. And I think this pain, when it's taken out of its great scape of glass, really helps us to think about that. So that's the reception of Revelation 12 through 3 artworks.
Well, thank you very much. Very informative as ever. And thank you for that, I was going to say whistle stop tour through the Revelation and its reception, but it was also pretty detailed, given the time constraints. So thank you very much, Michelle.
Pleasure as ever, James. Thank you.